The guard's hand closed on Josiah Halloway's elbow, and the young officer took his wrists and drew them behind his back, and the flat manila envelope went out of his fingers and skated across the polished terrazzo, face down under a pale oak bench. He was 62, in a green nylon windbreaker, with a folding cane hooked over his forearm, and he did not pull away. Around him the atrium rose 4 stories into cold skylight daylight. By the gallery entrance, Marshal Kerrigan, the man who had called the police, folded his arms and let one corner of his mouth go up. Kerrigan had taken one look at an old black man in cheap clothes photographing a ceiling on Free Admission Tuesday, decided he was a vagrant, and refused to look at one piece of paper. What Kerrigan did not know was that the envelope under the bench held the deed of gift for the wing they were standing in, and that the name cut into the limestone above the doorway was Halloway. Before we find out who the man in the handcuffs really was, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's dive back into the story. Josiah Halloway had poured concrete for a living before he did anything else, and if you want to understand the whole of him, you only need one fact. He had worked on this building, not as a donor, as labor. In the summer, he turned 17 on a crew of 11 men. He had spent 9 weeks finishing the slab of the loading dock and the service corridors of the West Addition, and he had troweled those floors on his knees in August with the radio going, and he had been very good at it, and he had wanted badly to see what they were going to hang upstairs. On the last Friday of that job, he had washed his hands at the hose bib and walked around to the public entrance in a clean shirt he had brought in his truck for exactly that purpose, and a man at the door had looked at him for about a second and a half and said the museum was closing. It was 2 in the afternoon. It was not closing. There were people going in behind him while the man said it. Josiah had stood there long enough to understand that he was not going to be allowed to argue, and then he had walked back around to the service side, and he had gotten in his truck, and he had driven home, and he had not told anybody about it for 11 years. He told Ruth Ann. That was who he told eventually, because Ruth Ann Halloway had a way of getting things out of a man without ever asking twice. She was a school librarian with a long neck and a terrible laugh, and an eye that Josiah would spend 40 years being amazed by. They had been married 2 years and were living in a rented half house when she came home one Saturday with a small painting under her arm that she had bought at a church rummage sale for $40. A study of 2 women at a kitchen table by a man nobody outside 3 counties had heard of, and she put it on the wall over the radiator and said, "That is ours, and I am not sorry." That is how it started. They did not collect the way rich people collect. They collected the way people collect who have to choose between a painting and a water heater. Ruth Ann found the artists, drove to their houses, sat in their kitchens, wrote them letters for 30 years. Josiah built a business. He went from a crew of 11 to being a foreman, from a foreman to a licensed structural engineer at night school at 34, with 2 children asleep in the back seat of the car outside the classroom, and from an engineer to a man who owned a contracting firm with 240 employees and put up parking structures and water treatment plants and, once, memorably, a bridge. And all the way through it, in every house they ever lived in, the walls filled up. $40 at a time. $200. Then, later, when there was money, more. But never the way the market wanted them to, because Ruth Ann only ever bought what she loved, and she loved the same thing her whole life. Black American painters of the 20th century, who had been overlooked so consistently that the overlooking had become part of the record. Ruth Ann died on a Thursday in April, 8 years before the morning in the atrium, and for 11 months afterward, Josiah did not do much of anything at all. Then he went to see the museum director with a lawyer and a proposal. He would pay for a new wing, not name a gallery, build a wing. Steel, glass, limestone, skylights, climate plant, the whole thing, at 41,000 square feet on the north side. Designed to take the collection he and Ruth Ann had spent 4 decades assembling, and the collection would come with it as an outright gift, and the deed of gift would run 111 pages, and every page of it would be about one thing. that these paintings would be shown, and shown properly, and cared for, forever. There was one clause his lawyer had fought him on for 2 weeks. Josiah had wanted the wing named for Ruth Ann alone. The board wanted both names. He lost that argument, which is how the limestone over the north entrance came to read the Halloway wing, and how, 8 years later, an old man in a windbreaker came to be walked out in handcuffs underneath it. He came on Tuesdays, free admission day. He had a lifetime pass and a trustee card in his wallet, and he never used either of them. And he had asked the director at the ribbon cutting for exactly one personal favor, that nobody working the floor be told what he looked like. The director at the time had laughed and said, "Josiah, they should know you." And Josiah had said, "If they know me, they will show me the wing they want me to see. I want the wing that's actually there." So on a gray Tuesday in the second week of October, he parked 3 blocks away, walked in through the public doors with everybody else, and put $1 in the donation box, which is a thing he did every single time and never once mentioned to anyone. He walked the way a builder walks, which is not the way anybody else walks through a museum. Other people look at the walls. Josiah looked at the joints. He came up the north stair with his hand riding the limestone rail, and he noticed, as he always did, that the third tread had a hairline in it that had been there since year 2 and had not moved a millimeter since, which meant it was a shrinkage crack and not a settlement crack, and he was quietly proud of that every time, because he had argued about that slab with the general contractor for a month. At the top of the stair, he stopped in front of the plaque. He did this every time too, and it embarrassed him, and he did it anyway. The limestone read, "The Halloway Wing," in letters cut an inch deep, and beneath it, smaller, the line he had insisted on and paid for and would have paid 10 times more for. The collection of Ruth Ann Halloway, who looked when others did not. He stood there for a while, then he went in. The wing was beautiful. He never got used to it. The main gallery ran 90 feet under a run of north-facing skylights, and the light came down the way he and the architect had spent 4 months fighting for it to come down, cool and diffuse and even, so that the paintings sat in daylight without a single spot on them. The floors were pale terrazzo, the walls were white. There was a bench of light oak every 30 feet, and Josiah walked it with his builder's eye, and the building told him things. The bench in the third bay rocked when a woman sat on it, a small talk, because the terrazzo had a low spot there of maybe 1/8 of an inch, and nobody had shimmed the foot. The service door in the corner had a draft coming under it that you could feel on your ankles, which meant the vestibule fan was out of balance, which meant the pressure relationship between the gallery and the loading corridor had flipped, which is a small thing that becomes a large thing over years. And at the north end, the corner of a limestone reveal had a fresh chip out of it, bright and unweathered, where somebody had run a cart into it and nobody had reported it. None of that was dangerous. It was just the ordinary, quiet evidence of a place being maintained by people who were tired. He filed it away the way he had filed things away his whole life, and he moved on, and he was in a good mood, and he was thinking about lunch. At the entrance to Gallery 4, a young woman in a museum attendant's blazer was standing her post, and she smiled at him, and she said good morning like she meant it. "Morning," Josiah said. "It's busy for a Tuesday. It's the loan show." She nodded through the doorway. "Everybody comes for that one. It's only up till the 11th. Her name tag said D. Okoye. She was maybe 23, with her hair pulled back and a museum lanyard and the particular careful posture of somebody who is very aware she is being watched at work. "Worth seeing? It's worth seeing," she said. And then, in a slightly different voice, quick and low, as if she had decided something, "Sir, if you sit on the bench in there, sit on the left side." Josiah looked at her. "The right side's a little damp sometimes," she said. And then a family came through, and she was smiling at them and pointing them toward the coat check. And the moment closed. He would think about those 11 words for a long time afterward, not because they were dramatic, because they were what was left of a young woman's courage after somebody had spent 11 days sanding it down. She could not say what she knew, so she said the smallest true thing she could get away with, to a stranger, in case it helped. Gallery 4 was the jewel box at the north end of his wing, a single high room 40 by 30. And for the 6 weeks of the loan exhibition, it held 11 works, 9 of them from the Halloway collection and 2 of them borrowed. Josiah walked in and let his eyes go where everybody's eyes went, which was to the far wall. The borrowed one hung alone. It was 6 feet by 4.5, an interior with a woman standing in a doorway, painted in 1948, and it was one of maybe 40 paintings in the country that Josiah would have crossed a state line to look at. It was not his. It belonged to a museum 1,100 miles away, and it had come here on a loan agreement that Josiah had personally read, because that is what you do when you have signed 111 pages about how paintings will be cared for. He stood in front of it for 4 or 5 minutes, the way you do. Then he happened to look up. It is important to understand that nobody else in that room was ever going to look up. Museums teach you, without ever saying it, to look at eye level. The walls are lit, the ceiling is not. And the ceiling in Gallery 4 was a flat white plane 22 feet overhead with a recessed cove, and it was the least interesting surface in the building. In 8 years, Josiah had probably been the only person to look at it on purpose, and he only did it because he had spent his life underneath other people's ceilings. There was a crack pattern up there, a fine one, in the plane maybe 4 feet out from the north wall, spreading in the shape of a hand with too many fingers. Josiah felt something in his stomach that he had not felt in about 20 years. A single straight crack in a ceiling is nothing. Buildings move. But that was not a single straight crack. That was a map, and the map had a center, and the center was the low point, and cracking in that pattern in a flat plaster plane means the substrate above it has been wet and has moved, and moved more than once. Wet and dry and wet again. Because a thing that gets wet 1 time swells, and a thing that gets wet 9 times cracks like that. And laid across the crack pattern, cutting it in 2, was a stripe of paint about 8 inches wide and 11 feet long that was a slightly different white from everything around it, and slightly flatter in sheen, and it had been rolled on, not sprayed. Somebody had painted over it, recently, badly, with whatever was in the shop. Josiah lowered his eyes very slowly down the north wall, and about halfway down, above and to the left of the painting, he found what he already knew was going to be there, a tide line, a faint hard-edge brown wave in the white paint, no more than 3 inches at its deepest, the exact shape water makes on gypsum when it runs down and stops and dries. The tide line was old. There was a second one under it, fainter. There were 2. He made himself finish. He looked at the floor. 2 feet out from the wall, under the left edge of the borrowed painting, the terrazzo had a patch about the size of a dinner plate, where the polish had gone dull and slightly chalky, which is what happens to a sealed floor when water sits on it and evaporates and leaves what was in it behind. Somebody had mopped it. You cannot mop that out. It is in the surface. And then he looked at the lower right corner of the canvas itself, and put on his reading glasses, and leaned in as close as the rope let him, and saw that the fabric there was not lying flat. It had a shallow, slow ripple in it, about the width of 2 fingers, running up from the stretcher, cockling. The canvas had taken on moisture and expanded, and the stretcher had not, and the paint film on top of it had started to lift into tiny ridges, so fine that in that flat, cool skylight, you could only see them from the side. Josiah Halloway stood in a gallery he had paid for, in a wing with his wife's name on it, and understood that the roof was leaking directly over a painting worth more than his first 3 houses put together, and that it had been leaking for weeks, and that somebody had rolled a stripe of white paint across the evidence. He walked to the doorway. Mounted on the wall beside it, at waist height, was the environmental data station, a small white housing with a readout and a printed log sheet on a clipboard beneath it, initialed daily. He read the log, 11 days, 22 initials, every single line within range. Temperature good, relative humidity good, no observations, no exceptions. He took his phone out of his windbreaker pocket, and he began quietly to take pictures. He photographed the ceiling from 3 positions so the crack pattern could be located in the room. He photographed the painted stripe with the seam of the skylight in frame for scale. He photographed both tide lines, the dull patch on the floor, and the log sheet with the date and the initials legible. Then he took out the mechanical pencil he had carried in his shirt pocket since 1987 and held it up flat against the lower right corner of the borrowed canvas at arm's length, not touching, so that the straight edge of the pencil would show in the photograph exactly how far the fabric had come away from true. That was the photograph Marshall Kerrigan saw when he came out of the service door. What Kerrigan saw precisely was this: an elderly black man in a cheap green windbreaker and orthopedic sneakers with a cane hooked over one arm, leaning under the rope with an object held out toward the most valuable thing in the building, holding a phone. Now, Marshall Kerrigan was 48, and he was the deputy director for advancement, and he was, at that moment, 11 days from the public announcement of a $40 million capital campaign that had his fingerprints on every page of it. He had come to the museum 2 years earlier from a symphony, and he was excellent at his job in the way that a certain kind of man is excellent, which is that he could make a room full of wealthy people feel interesting. He had raised a great deal of money. He had also, in 2 years, made the security staff a subcontractor, reduced the facilities budget by 19%, and instituted a rule that any incident report that could conceivably reach a donor's ear had to come through him first. He did not hate anyone. I want to be accurate about him. Marshall Kerrigan had never in his life said an ugly word about black people, and would have been genuinely, floridly offended to be accused of it, and had a photograph on his office wall of himself at a fundraiser with a jazz musician. What Kerrigan had was a filing system. Free Tuesday brought in people who did not give money, and in the private arithmetic he never said out loud, people who did not give money were weather. They were something the building had to endure between the events that mattered, and the old man under the rope was not, in Kerrigan's head, a person with a reason. He was a category with a problem. Hey! Kerrigan came across the gallery fast. Sir, step back from the painting, right now. Josiah straightened up and put the pencil in his pocket. Good morning. Do not touch the... Did you touch that? No, sir, I did not touch it, and I would not touch it. He said it evenly. I was measuring the corner. There is a problem with this painting, and there is a bigger problem with your ceiling, and I would like to show them both to you, and then I will leave. And there was the fork in the road, right there, 4 seconds wide. Give me your phone. I'm going to keep my phone, Josiah said. Can I ask you 3 questions? You can leave the gallery. 1. He held up a thick finger. There is a crack pattern in your ceiling plane about 4 feet off the north wall, and somebody has rolled a stripe of paint across it in the last few weeks. Who did that work, and is there a work order? Something moved in Kerrigan's face. It was fast, and it was not confusion. 2. There are 2 tide lines on that wall, one above the other, and a dull patch on the floor under them where water evaporated. Both of those are older than a month. When was the last roof inspection on this bay? You need to leave. 3. Josiah turned and pointed, not at the man, at the painting. The lower right corner of a canvas that does not belong to this museum is cockling. The fabric has taken water out of the air and swollen, and the paint is starting to lift. That is happening right now, today, in this room, and it will not stop by itself. So my third question is, who do I talk to about closing this gallery for 2 hours and getting a conservator and a roofer in here? Nobody said anything for a moment, and I want you to sit inside that moment with me, because everything after it was avoidable. Kerrigan could have said, show me. 2 words, he could have taken 11 steps and looked at a ceiling. The exhibition would have closed, the announcement would have slipped a quarter, and he would still have a career. But Kerrigan had already made the decision that mattered, and he had made it 11 days earlier, in an office, with a facilities memo in his hand. He knew about the roof. He had known since the last Thursday in September, when Walt Buchanan had brought him a 1-page memo with 2 photographs stapled to it. He had a campaign announcement, a lender's exhibition, a board meeting, and a number he had promised out loud in a room. And now an old man in a windbreaker was standing in his gallery saying, out loud, in front of an attendant, The exact 3 sentences Kerrigan had spent 11 days making sure nobody said out loud. So, he did what frightened men do. He stopped talking about the ceiling and started talking about the man. You know what? No. His voice came up and got that shine on it, the performing voice, aimed past Josiah at anyone in earshot. You are under the rope. You are holding an object out at a loaned artwork. You are photographing our security log. I don't know who you are. I don't know what this is. And I am not going to stand here and be lectured about my building by somebody who wandered in off the street. That is fair, Josiah said. You do not know who I am, so let me show you. My identification is in this envelope, and there is a card in my wallet, and I would be glad to hand you both, and then you can decide whether to listen to me about the ceiling. He started to lift the manila envelope. Do not hand me anything. Kerrigan turned his head without turning his body. Nolan. The security supervisor came in at a fast walk, a heavy, tired man in his 50s, and Kerrigan said, This gentleman is leaving, and the supervisor said, Sir, if you'll come with me, and put out a hand. And Josiah Halloway said, quite pleasantly, No, thank you. That was all he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not step back. He did not make a fist. He simply declined to be walked out of a building his wife's name was carved into before somebody looked at the ceiling, and that single mild refusal is the hinge the entire morning turns on, because it moved him in Kerrigan's head from a nuisance to a threat, and men like Kerrigan have a phone number for threats. Listen, quick thing before we go on. If you've ever been the person who was right and got told to leave anyway, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, because the next few minutes of this are hard, and I want you here for what comes after them. Kerrigan stepped 4 paces away and dialed. Yes, I need officers at the museum, North Wing, Gallery 4. We have a man who has gotten under the barrier and been in contact with a loaned artwork. He's refusing to leave and refusing to give us his phone. Older black male, green jacket, he's got a cane. No, he's not staff. No, I don't know what he was doing to it. That's exactly my concern. We have 150 visitors in the building, including a school group. Yes. Thank you. He hung up and looked at Josiah with the settled expression of a man who has successfully handed a question to somebody else. And Josiah, who had troweled the floor of the service corridor 45 years earlier, and who owned, on paper, 111 pages of promises about this room, stood in the cold skylight daylight and understood that the building was going to fail the test, and that he was going to let it all the way to the bottom. Because Josiah was not the first person to say those sentences in that gallery. He was just the first one Kerrigan could not fire. Danielle Okoye was 23 years old, and she had been a gallery attendant for 14 months. She worked 40 hours a week standing on terrazzo and took 2 evening classes a semester toward an art history degree she was paying for $140 at a time. And the reason she wanted that degree, if you got her talking, was a painting on the 2nd floor of the Halloway wing that she had seen on a school trip when she was 9 and had never entirely recovered from. She was good at the job. Attendants are not decoration. A good attendant is the museum's nervous system. They are the only people who stand in one room for 6 hours a day. And they know things about a gallery that no curator will ever know, the way a nurse on nights knows things no consultant does. 12 days before all of this, on the last Wednesday in September, Danny had come on shift at 10 and found a puddle. It was not a large puddle. It was maybe the size of a dinner plate, 2 feet out from the north wall of Gallery 4, and there was a single dark spot on the wall above it, and when she looked up, she could not see anything at all because she did not know to look at crack patterns. She did what she was trained to do. She coned it. She called it in. And at the end of her shift, she filled out an incident report on the museum's own form, date, location, observation, and she signed it. 2 days later, there was another one. She wrote a second report. 4 days after that, on a Tuesday, she came in and the wall had been painted. And the report she had filed did not appear anywhere in the system, and there was no work order posted, and when she asked the supervisor, he said it had gone up to advancement. So, she wrote a third one, and this time she took it up herself. Marshal Kerrigan read it in about 4 seconds. Then he laid it face down on the desk, put his hand flat on top of it, and smiled at her. "Danielle, sit down for a second. Let me help you with something." She sat down. "Do you know how many incident reports this museum generated last year?" He did not wait. 410. "Do you know how many of them were weather? A visitor tracks in rain, somebody spills a water bottle, condensation off an HVAC diffuser in August. It's a building. Buildings are wet sometimes." He tapped the paper twice under his hand. "Now, here's the part I need you to hear, because you're bright, and I don't want this to hurt you. This is the third piece of paper you've written in 8 days that says, in effect, that facilities and conservation and my office are all failing to notice water in a room with a loan in it. That's not an observation anymore. That's an allegation, and it lives forever, and it's got your name on it, and it's got your name on it in the same month I'm being asked to defend headcount to a board." He let that sit for a moment. "Nobody's threatening anybody," he said warmly. "I'm telling you how a file reads." Danny said quietly that she had seen water on the floor 3 times. "You saw a wet floor," Kerrigan said. "I'm sure you did. Let the grown-ups decide what a wet floor means." And he swept the report into a drawer and stood up, which meant she stood up too, and he held the door for her and told her to have a good afternoon. She had gone back down the stairs and stood her post. That is what she would say, 8 weeks later, to an investigator with a recorder on the table between them, and it is the most damning sentence in the entire file. He never actually said he'd fire me. He just put my name and the layoffs in the same sentence and let me do the rest myself. And Walt Buchanan had gone through his own version of it, and it is worth 2 minutes of your time, because Walt was not a villain either. Walt was 57, a facilities technician, 22 years on the property, a man with a bad shoulder and a daughter in nursing school. He was the one who had actually gone up on the roof on the last Thursday in September with a ladder and a flashlight, and he was the one who found it, a failed flashing at the junction where the new North Wing's parapet met the older roof deck, 8 feet of sealant gone brittle and split, and a low spot in the membrane that ponded after any real rain and drained slowly through the joint. He photographed it. He wrote a 1-page memo. He recommended emergency temporary repair and, in the meantime, closing the affected bay. He took it to advancement because that was the rule now. Kerrigan had been extremely pleasant. He had said the words temporary repair back to Walt with obvious approval. He had asked in a friendly way what a full flashing replacement would run. And Walt had said probably 60 to 80,000 in a crane. And Kerrigan had made a face like a man hearing about a friend's illness. Then he had asked how long they could reasonably go, and Walt had said honestly that a bad storm could put water through it in an hour and a dry month might do nothing at all. Kerrigan had heard the second half of that sentence. He told Walt to have the interior surfaces made good, which is how a stripe of the wrong white paint came to be rolled across a crack pattern in a ceiling by a maintenance man who was following instructions, and he told him the roof was going into the capital plan for spring, and he thanked him for his diligence, and he kept the memo. Walt went home and did not sleep well, and then he slept fine, because that is what people do. He was not a bad man. He was a man with a shoulder and a daughter and 22 years who had put a piece of paper in the hand of someone above him and had allowed himself to believe that this was the same thing as being finished. That is what an institutional failure actually looks like. It is never one monster. It is 4 or 5 ordinary people, each with exactly one thing to lose, arranged by a single person who knows precisely what each of those things is. So, when Kerrigan hung up the phone in Gallery 4 that Tuesday morning, Donnie Okoye was standing 11 feet away in the doorway, watching a stranger get punished for saying out loud the sentence she had been punished for 3 times in writing. "Mr. Kerrigan," her voice came out thin, and she pushed it through anyway. "Sir, he's right about the wall. I filed it. I filed it 3 times. There was standing water on the 24th and the 26th and the 30th. Kerrigan turned and looked at her, and his voice went gentle, which was worse than shouting. "Danielle, take the lobby post, now, please. But the corner of the canvas is, the lobby post. And Danielle Okoye, 23 years old, 14 months in, with $140 a class and a mother who bragged about her at church, turned to go, because that is what almost all of us do. And anybody who tells you different has never had a manager's hand flat on top of their name. She got as far as the doorway. Then she stopped, and she stood there with her back to the room, and she did not go to the lobby. Josiah saw all of it, and it told him more about his own wing than 8 years of quarterly reports ever had. People always stop me here and ask the same question, and they ask it a little angrily, which is fair enough. Why did he not just say it? 7 words. I paid for this wing, I'm a trustee. The deputy director goes the color of paper, the phone call gets walked back, the gallery gets closed, and everybody goes home. Why would a 62-year-old man with a bad knee stand there and let this happen? Josiah asked himself that too, standing in the cold skylight light waiting for a police car. He had an answer, and it came in 3 pieces. The first was proof. If he said the 7 words now, the next 10 minutes would be about him. Kerrigan would fall over himself, and the apology would be the last honest thing anybody said in that building for a month. By 4 o'clock, there would be a work order dated retroactively, an inspection memo, and a clean story with 3 signatures on it, and no way on earth to establish what had been true at 11:15 on a Tuesday morning. He had spent 40 years around construction disputes. He knew exactly how fast a paper trail can grow backwards. Donors get told what happened. Strangers get shown. The second was the young woman in the doorway. He did not yet know she had filed 3 reports. He only knew she had told a stranger which side of a bench to sit on, and had then taken 4 steps toward the lobby and stopped. He knew that shape, and he knew that if this ended with a name and a title, the lesson of the morning for every attendant in that building would be that telling the truth is safe only when a rich man happens to be standing next to you when you do it. That is not a lesson. That is a lottery ticket. And the third piece he would only say out loud once, much later, to his daughter in a kitchen. He had been turned away from that building at 17 in a clean shirt. He had spent 45 years and a considerable fortune making sure that the north end of it had his wife's name on it, and a door that anybody could walk through free on Tuesdays. And he had never, not once, tested it. He had always come in as a man in a windbreaker and had always quietly been left alone, and he had let that stand as evidence. He was 62. He was standing in the middle of the answer. He was going to hear it all the way through. "I'll wait right here," he told the security supervisor. "I'm not going anywhere." They waited 6 minutes. Nobody spoke. The school group came through and went out again. And 2 floors up, in a service corridor, the chief curator of the museum finished a conversation about a shipping crate and pressed the button for the elevator, which is a completely unremarkable thing to do and which mattered more than anything else that happened that morning. The officer arrived at 11:22. Shane Prewitt was 26, 2 years and 4 months on the job, and he was not a cruel man. If you had asked him, he would have told you with complete sincerity that he treated everybody the same, and he would have believed it. What he had never been given in 2 years and 4 months was 10 uninterrupted minutes of training on the single most dangerous thing an officer does, which is walk into a situation with no idea what happened and immediately decide, from clothing and posture and who talks first, which of 2 people is the complainant and which is the suspect. He had about 9 seconds and 2 human beings. One of them was in a suit with a museum credential clipped to the pocket, standing in front of a security supervisor, moving toward him with his hand out and his story already loaded. The other was an old man in a windbreaker holding a manila envelope, saying nothing. Everything that followed came out of those 9 seconds. The rest was paperwork. "Officer, thanks for coming. Marshal Kerrigan, I'm the deputy director." Handshake. Then the step to the side, so that the 2 of them were looking at Josiah together, which is a thing people do without knowing they do it, and which has decided more cases than evidence ever has. This gentleman got under the barrier in there and was holding something up against a lone painting. That work is insured for a number I'd rather not say in a public gallery. He's photographed our security log. He refuses to hand over the phone, and he's refused 2 lawful requests to leave. Prewitt looked at Josiah. "Sir, is that true?" "Parts of it," Josiah said. "I did lean under the rope. I did not touch the painting, and I never would. I photographed the ceiling, the wall, the floor, the corner of that canvas, and the log sheet, because all 5 of them are evidence that there is water coming into this room. I have declined to hand over my phone, and I have declined to leave until somebody looks up." He raised the envelope slightly. "Officer, my name is Josiah Halloway. My identification is in this envelope along with a document that will explain the whole thing to you in about 10 seconds. May I show you?" That was, in the plainest terms available, a man offering a police officer the solution to the entire problem, out loud, with his hands where they could be seen. "Sir, do you have any weapons on you?" "No." "Do you work for this museum?" "No," said Josiah, "but my relationship to this building is on the paper in my hand." Behind Prewitt's shoulder, Marshal Kerrigan was shaking his head slowly with his eyebrows raised, doing the small, silent pantomime of a reasonable man listening to nonsense. He did not have to say one word. He had a credential on his pocket and a building behind him, and the sorting had already happened, and from that moment on, every sentence out of Josiah Halloway's mouth was going to be processed as an excuse rather than as information. "He's not a trustee, he's not staff, and I've never seen him before," Kerrigan said. That last part, at least, was completely true. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Hand me the envelope." "I'm going to do better than that," Josiah said. "I'm going to open it and hold it out to you. My wallet's in the inside left pocket of this jacket, and I'm not reaching for it. I'm going to use my right hand on the envelope, slowly, and I'd like you to watch my hands the whole way so there's no confusion, all right?" It was the most cooperative sentence anyone spoke in that gallery all morning. He narrated the movement before he made it, which is a thing black men in this country learn before they learn to drive, and he made it slowly, holding a document about a building he had paid for, in front of a man who had told him twice that he had no business being in it. He brought his right hand across to the flap. "Hands! Keep your hands where I can see them!" I want to be fair to Officer Prewitt, so here is his version. A credentialed executive had told him this man had been in contact with an artwork worth a fortune. He had asked twice for the item and not received it. He saw a hand move into a container. In the language he was trained in, that is a furtive movement, and furtive movement is the phrase that turns a mistake into a policy. And here's the other version. A man had just told him, out loud, in advance, exactly what his hand was going to do and why, and Prewitt did not listen, for precisely the same reason Kerrigan did not look at the ceiling, and Walt did not push the memo, and the supervisor did not ask a single question. 4 separate times that morning, it was faster to trust a label than to check a fact. The cane came off Josiah's arm and clattered on the terrazzo. The envelope went out of his hand and skated away face down and stopped under the pale oak bench in the 3rd bay, the one that rocked. "You're not under arrest, sir. You're being detained." "I understand," Josiah said, and his voice did not change at all, and that is the thing everyone who was there remembers most. It did not change. The cuffs went on behind his back, and they went on tight, 1 click past necessary, out of the small performing competence of a young officer with an audience, because the sound of that ratchet settles the question of who is in charge. Josiah felt the steel find the bone. He said nothing about it. 40 minutes later, there would be 2 red bands across his wrists that took 2 days to fade, and a photograph of them would end up in an internal affairs file, and that photograph would matter a great deal. They walked him out of Gallery 4, across the main hall of the Halloway wing, under the north-facing skylights, past 9 paintings his wife had chosen with her own eyes, and out through the doorway. He was not dragged. Nobody hit him. It took 100 seconds. And on the way through the doorway, he passed within 18 inches of a slab of limestone with letters cut an inch deep into it, and not one person in that procession read a single word of it. In the atrium, a school group of 4th graders went silent all at once. A woman at the information desk stood up slowly, and Danny Okoye, who had not gone to the lobby post, stood against the wall by the coat check with her heart going like a bird in a box, and thought about a hand flat on a piece of paper and about $140 a class, and then took her phone out of her blazer pocket, turned it sideways, and pressed record. Her hands shook so badly that the first 3 seconds are unusable. She got the rest. She got the cuffs and the cane on the floor behind them and the envelope under the bench, and she walked backward, filming, and got the letters over the doorway in the same frame as the man in handcuffs, which is the frame that ended up on the news. And as they came level with her, Josiah turned his head, found her, looked straight into the camera for about a second, and gave her one small nod. Danny said later she did not know what it meant. She only knew it meant keep going. So she kept going. Hey, real quick, if you have ever stood there with your phone out, doing the math on whether the truth is worth your job, tell me about it in the comments, because I would genuinely like to know how that went for you. And if you want to see what happens next, hit like and subscribe, because the next 4 minutes are the reason I wanted to tell you this one. Because at that exact moment, on the far side of the atrium, the elevator doors opened. Dr. Vivian Stedman had been chief curator for 19 years. She was 58, silver blonde, permanently carrying a tablet and a cold cup of tea, and she had spent the previous 40 minutes arguing with a registrar about a crate. She came out of the elevator reading, and she got 4 steps into the atrium before her eyes came up. She had stood next to Josiah Halloway on a stage in that atrium 8 years earlier, while a mayor talked too long. She had sat in his kitchen twice. She had spent 9 months of her life going through Ruth Ann Halloway's card index with him, in his dining room, one artist at a time, and she had watched a 60-year-old man cry over a shoebox of letters, and she had gone home and cried herself. The tablet hit the floor. Stop! It came out of her so loudly that it bounced off 4 stories of stone, and every person in that atrium turned. Stop right there. Take those off him. Take them off him right now. Ma'am, I need you to stay back. Do you have any idea who that is? She was already crossing the floor, and she was not slowing down. She came up short and pointed, and her hand was shaking, and her voice broke in the middle of it. That is Josiah Halloway. That is the donor. He built this wing. He gave us the collection in it. His wife's name is on the wall you just walked him past. She rounded on Kerrigan, and her face did something that people who worked there talked about for years. Marshall, what have you done? Marshall Kerrigan did not answer, because he was looking at the doorway, where the limestone said, the Halloway wing in letters cut an inch deep, and had said it every working day for the 2 years and 2 months he had walked under it. The second unit had come through the main doors 90 seconds earlier, and Sergeant Dennis Kowalczyk had already been walking, because 24 years teaches you to arrive slowly and look at the floor on your way in. He had come up the atrium the long way past the bench in the 3rd bay, and he had done the one thing nobody else in that building had done all morning. He had bent down and picked up the paper. He came over with the manila envelope in one hand, squared and closed, and a black leather wallet he had found 6 feet from it in the other. Shane, he said, come here a minute. He did not make a speech. He opened the envelope and drew out the top document and held it so that only Prewitt could see it, and ran his thumb down the first page. Then he turned it over and read the signature block. Then he opened the wallet and looked at the driver's license, and looked at the man in handcuffs, and looked at the license again, and then at a second card behind it. Deed of gift, Kowalczyk said quietly. 111 pages. Donor of record, Josiah A. Halloway. There's a trustee identification card in the wallet, current, and a driver's license with the same name and the same face. He tipped his head about an inch toward the doorway. Same name as the wall. He didn't say, Prewitt started. He said it, Kowalczyk said. I heard the end of it from the door. Take them off. Something else came out of the envelope as Kowalczyk drew the pages clear. A small laminated photograph, 4 by 6, slipped loose and turned over twice in the air and landed face up on the terrazzo between all of them. A tall woman with a long neck laughing at somebody off camera, holding a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors with a limestone wall behind her and her own name on it. Nobody picked it up for a second. Then the sergeant did carefully, with 2 fingers at the edges, and handed it to Josiah after the cuffs came off. They came off in the atrium of the Halloway wing, in front of about 60 people. Josiah brought his hands around and turned them over, and there were 2 raised red bands across his wrists, the skin gone white at the edges. Dr. Stedman put her hand over her mouth. Somebody in the school group said, out loud, in the voice of a 9-year-old, "That man didn't do anything." "Mr. Halloway," Kowalczyk said, "my body camera is running, and I want this in the file. I'm sorry, this was handled wrong from the first minute, and I'm going to document it that way." "Thank you, Sergeant." Josiah flexed his fingers a few times to get the blood back into them. "Are you keeping that envelope? You want it back?" "No," Josiah said. "I want you to keep it. I want everything preserved, starting now. Your camera, his camera, the atrium and gallery cameras, that young woman's phone over there, the recording of the call this man made, the environmental log on the wall in Gallery 4, and every email in this building with the word roof in it since the 1st of September. Nobody deletes anything." Kowalczyk looked at him for a second, because that is not what people ask for 90 seconds after handcuffs come off. Then Josiah turned around. Marshal Kerrigan was standing very still with his mouth slightly open, and he had aged about 10 years and 2 minutes, and he was already visibly assembling a sentence. "Mr. Halloway, I want you to know that I had absolutely no—" "Not yet," Josiah said. He was already walking, and everyone in that atrium, including 2 police officers and the chief curator of the museum, found themselves walking after him. "There's a painting in there that doesn't belong to us, and it is getting wet. We're going to deal with the painting first, then we'll deal with you." What happened in Gallery 4 over the next 25 minutes was not revenge, and I want to be precise about that, because people always want the next part to be revenge, and it never is. And the reason the real thing is better is that revenge ends, and this did not. Josiah walked to the middle of the room, looked up, and said 6 words. "Close this gallery. Get her down." Dr. Stedman had the registrar and 2 preparators in the room in 4 minutes. They brought soft gloves and a padded cart, and they took the borrowed painting off the wall, the way you take a sleeping child off a couch, and they carried it out to conservation. And Stedman stood in the doorway and called the Lending Museum 1,100 miles away herself from the gallery out loud, because Josiah asked her to make that call where people could hear it. Then he did the thing that finished Marshal Kerrigan, and he did it without raising his voice once. He borrowed a laser pointer from the registrar and put the dot on the ceiling. "Everybody look up," he said. "You have all been in this room 100 times, and none of you has ever looked up. And I don't say that to be clever. I say it because I only looked up because I used to build ceilings." He traced the crack pattern with the dot, the whole hand-shaped map of it. "That is not a settlement crack. A settlement crack is a line. That is a wetting and drying pattern, and it means the substrate above this plaster has been wet, dried, and wet again, more than once, over weeks." He moved the dot 11 feet along. "That stripe is a different white and a different sheen, and it was rolled, not sprayed, which means it was done by hand with whatever was in the shop, which means it was not a scheduled decoration job. Somebody covered this." Down the wall. 2 tide lines, one above the other. That is 2 separate events, not one. And on the floor there, under where the painting was, the sealer has gone dull in a circle about the size of a dinner plate, and you cannot mop that out, because that is what's left after standing water evaporates. He turned and walked to the doorway and lifted the clipboard off the environmental station. "And this is the log, 11 days, 22 initials. Every line in range, no observations, no exceptions." He held it up so that the sergeant's body camera could see it. "There was standing water on this floor on the 24th, the 26th, and the 30th of last month, 3 times. It is not in this log. Somebody stood in this doorway and initialed a piece of paper that said nothing was happening in a room where something was very clearly happening. And the reason that matters more than everything else in this building is that this log is the only thing a lender has to trust when they let their painting come here." He put the clipboard down. "Sergeant, I'd like that log taken today, and the last 2 years of them out of the file room, and I'll sign whatever you need me to sign." Then he turned to Kerrigan. "You knew," he said. It was not a question, and it was not loud. "You knew before I walked in here. Nobody rolls a stripe of paint across a ceiling crack by accident. Somebody put it in writing to you, and you kept it. And I'd bet the wing that there's a memo with photographs in your office right now, and in about 2 hours a sergeant is going to read it." "I don't think you did it because you hate anybody," Josiah said. And that stopped Kerrigan cold, because it was not what he was braced for. "I think you'd pass a polygraph on that, and I think you'd be honestly insulted to be asked. You did it because closing this gallery cost you a campaign announcement, and because looking at that ceiling would have obligated you to something, and because the cheapest way in the world to make a question disappear is to make the person asking it disappear instead. It worked on a facilities man with 22 years in. It worked 3 times on a 23-year-old attendant. This morning, you tried it on an old man with a cane, and it very nearly worked, and I want you to stand there and feel how close that was. Mr. Halloway, please, if I could just—" "You're done here," Josiah said. "Effective now. Dr. Stedman will walk you to your office and then to your car. You don't touch a keyboard, a phone, or a file on the way. Everything in that office is preserved as of this minute, including your email, including your calendar, including whatever you said to Walt Buchanan on the 26th of September. And then he turned away from him. And that was the last sentence Josiah Halloway ever said to Marshal Kerrigan, and it was not about Kerrigan at all. "Miss Okoye." Danny came forward from the doorway, with her phone still in her hand and the look on her face of somebody waiting to be fired. "You wrote it up," Josiah said. 3 times, on the museum's own form, signed. "Yes, sir. None of them went anywhere." "They went somewhere," he said. "They went into a drawer belonging to a man who was walking to his car. And in about 3 weeks, when the lender's lawyers asked this institution when it was first informed of water in that gallery, the answer is not going to be today. The answer is going to be the 24th of September, in writing, from you." He put out one thick hand and she shook it. "You were the first person in this building to do your job. Everything that happens from here starts with your piece of paper. The roofers opened the parapet junction 9 days later. What they found was 8 feet of failed flashing, a ponding low spot in the membrane, and insulation above the gallery floor ceiling that came out in wet slabs and weighed, according to the foreman, about 4 times what it should have. The water had been finding its way in since the first week of September. The repair, done properly, with a crane, cost $109,000, which is roughly what a museum spends on a single evening's fundraising gala. The conservator's report on the borrowed painting ran to 14 pages. Priyanka Rao, at an independent lab across the city, documented cockling along the lower right quadrant and the beginning of tenting in the paint film, and wrote the sentence that ended a career in 1 line. The observed deformation is consistent with repeated cyclic moisture exposure over a period of weeks rather than a single event. The painting was saved. It went home 2 months later, stabilized, with a condition report attached to it that no lending institution in the country will ever forget. The audit of the environmental logs went back 2 years and found 2 more stretches of initials that did not match anything else in the building's records. The lender's counsel wrote a letter. The insurer opened a file. The capital campaign announcement was postponed and then quietly restructured, and the museum's own board commissioned an outside review of what it called, in the report, a culture of upward-only reporting, which is a very expensive way of saying that people had learned it was safer to tell Marshal Kerrigan things than to write them down. Kerrigan was terminated for cause. The museum world is small, and its memory is long, and a man who suppresses a facilities memo about a loaned work does not get a second institution. He has not worked in the field since. There was, for a while, talk of a fraud referral over the log sheets. That went nowhere, which disappointed a lot of people and did not particularly disappoint Josiah, who said that a man who has to explain the last 2 years of his life at every interview for the rest of his working life has already received a fairly complete sentence. Walt Buchanan kept his job. He sat with the investigators for 5 hours and gave them the memo, the photographs, the dates, and the conversation. And his testimony is the reason the file went from a building problem to a person problem. He also asked to be moved off the reporting line that went through advancement and got it, and he is the one who now walks that roof every 8 weeks with a clipboard and a camera, and he does not send his memos to one person anymore. He sends them to 3. Officer Shane Prewitt was placed on administrative duty pending an internal affairs review. The body camera footage, the atrium cameras, Danny's video, and 2 photographs of a 62-year-old man's wrists all went into the file. Josiah wrote to the department, and his letter did not ask for anybody to be fired. It asked one question: what is the written procedure in this agency when a detained person offers identification? And why did that procedure not operate here? That question is now 4 hours of scenario training that Prewitt himself helped write, which some people find unsatisfying, and which Josiah considers the only genuinely useful thing to come out of the whole morning. Danielle Okoye finished her degree 18 months later. The museum paid for the last 4 semesters and gave her a paid internship in conservation, and she is now an assistant in that department, which means she spends her days with a raking light and a magnifier looking very carefully at surfaces to see what is happening to them, which anybody who is in that atrium will tell you is exactly the correct job for her. Her 3 incident reports are pinned up, framed, in the conservation lab. Somebody put them there as a joke. Nobody has taken them down. And there was one more thing, and Josiah did it himself on a Thursday. 5 weeks before all of this, Kerrigan had walked a school group out of the second-floor gallery in the middle of their visit for being, in his phrase, disruptive for the space, and had said it in front of the children, and their teacher, a 60-year-old woman named Odessa Pryor, had been made to stand there and take it. Josiah found the booking in the education office records, called the school, and asked whether they might like to come back. They came back on a Thursday morning in January, and he met them at the door in his green windbreaker and walked them through the whole wing himself for 2 hours, and stopped in front of a small painting of 2 women at a kitchen table and told 26 11-year-olds that it cost $40 at a church rummage sale, and that the woman who bought it had a terrible laugh. So here is the honest part, and it is uncomfortable, and I am not going to dress it up for you. Josiah Halloway got saved by 4 coincidences. He happened to be the donor. He happened to have the deed of gift in his hand that morning for the entirely unrelated reason that he had been at his lawyer's office the day before. He happened to have a 23-year-old attendant brave enough to press record, and a chief curator happened to step out of an elevator in the 1 minute of the one day it mattered. Take away any one of those 4, and there is no video, no audit, no roof repair, no story. There is a man who was detained in a museum, released with an apology that nobody wrote down, and a painting that kept getting wet until the exhibition came down and somebody 1,100 miles away opened a crate and started asking questions. Most people who get looked at the way Josiah got looked at that morning do not own the wing. They do not have 111 pages in an envelope. Nobody comes running across the marble shouting their name. They just go back around to the service side, the way he did at 17 in a clean shirt, and they get in the truck and drive home. And nothing about it is ever written down anywhere at all. And the 2 failures in that building were the same failure. Nobody looked. Kerrigan did not look at the ceiling. Prewitt did not look at the license. The supervisor did not ask a single question. 22 initials went on a log by people who were standing in a doorway looking at their phones. Every one of them read a label instead, because a label is faster, and it is free, and it feels exactly like knowing. A building will let you get away with that for a while, and so will a person, and then one day neither of them will. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been the one who saw it first and got told to go stand somewhere else? Have you ever been Danny, holding your phone, doing the math on your rent? And be honest with yourself for a second, because I am being honest with myself. Have you ever been the one in the good jacket who decided in 9 seconds and never checked? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and this one I really do want to hear. If this story meant something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this is what I do here every week. ordinary people, written off in a few seconds, and what happens when somebody finally looks. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of each other, and I'll see you in the next one.